Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the inaugural lecture this year of the Schuman Centre Seminar Series. I'm David Levine, together with Philip Genschel and Meilan Gao. We're organizing the seminar series this year. Philip, do you want to stand up so everybody can... Philip, stand up. You're being introduced. All right, Philip and I, together with Meilan Gao, who's not here, are organizing the seminar series this year. You can sit down. Sorry. I'm very pleased to see a lot of familiar faces, a few unfamiliar faces. It's a very good turnout. I hope that many of you will return to see the subsequent seminars and lectures in the series. We hope to make the entire series a centerpiece of sort of intellectual interdisciplinary work for the Schuman Centre and also for the entire EUI. So I do hope that people will try to attend many of these seminars as possible. Okay, this, as I say, is the inaugural lecture, which we've named after Yves Mény. And you probably know Yves Mény as he's the past president of the EUI. You might even be aware of some of his many activities building institutions in higher education, serving as presidents of universities as well as the EUI. He's done research throughout the world before and after he was at the EUI. He's worked on democracy and populism. But what you might not know about Yves Mény is that he was also the first director of the Schuman Centre, which is why it is that we've named this in his honor. So it's for his role in getting us started down the path that brings us all together, that we've named the lecture after him. He actually wanted to be here today, but the truth is we only gave him 2 weeks' notice about the fact that we were naming a lecture after him, and he already had prior commitments. But he did have something to say. So Bridget is going to be Yves Mény for today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yves has sent me this and asked me to read it out on his behalf. So many thanks to Bridget and to the Schuman Centre for their kind initiative. I feel very honoured and moved by the decision to link my name to the annual inaugural lecture of the Centre. I had indeed the great chance to launch the Centre in 1993, starting from practically nothing. I had an even greater chance to be succeeded by extremely dedicated colleagues, and he names Helen, Stefano Bartolini, and Bridget Laffin, who each with their own talent, I think the jury is out on Laffin, and leadership have made the Centre grow and develop. I would also like to associate these words of thanks with Joseph Weiler, who in the 1980s created the ancestor of the Schuman Centre, the European Policy Unit, which unfortunately lost the momentum after his departure to the US and the departure of Emile Noël, former president of the EUI, who created the Centre in spite of so many oppositions to change and innovation at the time. Unfortunately, I am unable to participate in this inaugural lecture due to previous commitments. I am fighting, if I may say so, on another front, helping to win the battle against cystic fibrosis, a terrible genetic disease which reduces by half the life expectancy of children. Yves has a family member who suffers from cystic fibrosis, and that's why he can't be with us this afternoon, but he will come next year because we will give him sufficient notice. But I'm very glad that we are honouring Yves as the first director of the Schuman Centre.
Okay, and with that, let me introduce today's inaugural speaker of the Yves Mény Lecture. So let me say that there's many branches of Islam, that they're often in confrontation with each other. They're often in confrontation with the West, with Israel, with Russia. Islam plays a direct role in the life of the EU, in France, in England, and Germany in particular. In Central Asia, historically, Islam has confronted communism, and nowadays it confronts its many splinters that are left over from communism. So there's a very contemporary set of issues that are also very complex, involving the role of Islam in the relation to the West and the rest of the world. Olivier Roy has devoted a life to the study of these questions and these issues. He's written books. I counted many thousands of citations to his work on Google Scholar. In the 1990s, he wrote Islam and Resistance in Afghanistan, and he wrote about the failure of political Islam. In 2000s, he wrote about globalized Islam, the search for a new ummah, and he wrote The New Central Asia, Geopolitics and the Birth of Nations, as well as Secularism Confronts Islam. He's directed research projects, he's advised governments, he's lived and worked in some of the countries he's studied, and we're very pleased to have Olivier here now to share some of his knowledge with us. Olivier, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. My lecture will be mainly on I would say, we'll begin with a critical approach of the social sciences towards Islam and the Middle East. There has been recently a very interesting article by Gregory Gause, specialist in Saudi Arabia, who asked why we, the political scientists, did miss, the Arab Spring. And it's true that the political scientists are just second after the economists to predict events. In 2010, most of the political scientists were working either on the issue of the state, and mainly authoritarian state. Why did authoritarian state stand in the Middle East? Or we were working on Islam and so. So almost nobody did predict the Arab Spring. And in 2011, most of the political scientists were at loss, to explain, what is going on. And the journalists, in fact, were on the front line, of explaining the events. In 2012, Islamism was back. The Muslim Brothers and the Nahda party won the election, so political scientists jumped, on the train saying, Islamism didn't fail, Islamism is winning, and so and so. And it failed. So in 2013, authoritarianism is back. The Egyptian army made a coup and is now in charge in Egypt. So we have this kind of cyclical events. You can say the same thing, for 20 years, and sooner or later you will be right. It's the Swiss proverb, a broken clock is right twice a day. And you just have to stand with your point for 20 years. It's exactly what I did, when I wrote The Failure of Political Islam 20 years ago, and regularly I'm right, And I think I will be right for the next 20 years, So the problem is that then we are stuck to the media time, And if you look at the medias, every day is a turning point, Something extraordinary is happening, Usually the situation is getting worse every day. That's the media law. And every year, of course, is the beginning of a new era. More than that, I would say, when political scientists do predictions, many predictions are in fact full of value judgment. The idea, for instance, that the different wars in Gaza and in Lebanon will trigger a new intifada, a new revolt of the Arab street, a new radicalization of Islam, and so and so. But it's always based on a feeling, and not on facts, because we don't have facts on this issue. So, what is the problem of the studies on Middle East and Islam? The first is politicization. It's a very highly politicized field. Of course, it's not the first time studies on communism were politicized, by definition. And if you look at people working on China, although there are a lot of political disagreement among themselves, but nothing to the level of the Middle East and Islamic studies. In the USA particularly, more than in Europe, the Middle East and the Center are, I would say, roughly speaking, divided into two categories. The majority being with a pro-Palestinian sensitivity. I'm not saying militantism, that's another story. And a few other on pro-Israel sensitivity. And the fight, the struggle is in the academy is very strong. You have this website, Campus Watch, which is dedicated to checking, the pro-Palestinians' position of the scholars of the Middle Eastern centers, for instance, and to publicly denounce them. So it's a very, very polemical issue. But it's also, and it's quite normal, a very emotional issue. If you look at the number of op-ed blogs written by scholars on Middle East, you will be struck by the emotional dimension, the appeals to feeling, personal testimonies, judgment of values, appeal to do this and that, call for the decision makers to take this or that kind of decision. And of course, there is a crisis in the Middle East every month. So there is a lot of opportunities to express his or her own point of view. And also we have another element which exists elsewhere, but is very strong with the Middle East too. It's the role of the think tanks, think tanks are in fact leading the debates, and the think tanks are not at all separated from the academic. Many scholars can work, in a think tank for some time, are invited by the think tanks, do invite people of the think tank to make lectures, to have debates, and so on and so. So, as you know, the role of the think tank is to provide an analysis of the situation with policy recommendations. And so, of course, by definition, the fact that the think tanks lead the dance, if I can say that, accentuates the politicization of the field. Of course, some scholars could say, we have nothing to do with that, We should abstain to write op-ed. We should abstain to work with think tanks. We should abstain to advise governments on these issues, and go just for scholarly works. For the archaeologist, it doesn't create a real problem, But for political scientists, it's a bit of a problem to say, don't want, to be involved into politics. So, in this sense, what is the use of political science if you have nothing to say about the definition of policy? So, it's an illusion, to stay outside the field. And, of course, this politicization has a lot of consequences, intellectual and conceptual consequences. I will start, from the first division, which is mainly, which is very strong, as I said, in the USA, far less in Europe. The division between, roughly speaking, the pro-Israeli centers and the pro-Palestinian centers, even if few of them would accept to be defined like that. But once again, just look at the op-ed written by the members of the different institutes, and it will be clear. Usually, among the first, let's say the pro-Israeli institutes, you have the dominant thing is an essentialization of Islam. You have this idea that Islam is a global factor, which explains the policy of Hezbollah, which explains Hamas, which explains terrorism, which explains anti-Semitism in Europe, which explains radicalization of the youth, and so and so. So it contributes to bring together the issue of the geostrategy of the Middle East, immigration, and Islam as a religion. Right? But the problem is that this view is in fact shared, by many scholars of the other side, if I can say that. Usually the pro-Palestinian institutes are very close to the works of Edward Said, Orientalism. The idea that one should deconstruct precisely Islam as a tool of inducing, I would say, the people of the Middle East into some sort of false consciousness. Right? Problem is, there are two problems. One is the importance in the Middle Eastern centers, and it's true in Europe and in USA, of Islamology, the studies of Islam as such. And by definition, Islamology is essentialist. By definition, there is the idea that there is a political, in Islamic political thought, which has been constructed since the time of the Prophet, but mainly based on the teachings and the practices of the Prophet himself. And even if this discipline, Islamology, agrees that there has been a lot of controversy inside Islam, a lot of different trends, thinking, and so and so, still there is this idea that to understand Hamas or to understand Hezbollah or to understand Al-Qaeda, you have, to go back, to the history of the Muslim world. So usually, if we go back to the two camps, to the two sides, I can say that, they agree that Islam is the explanation, but they disagree of what is the role of Islam. In the first school, you have the idea that intrinsically there is a genealogy of radicalization in Islam, while for the other groups, radicalization, the contemporary radicalization, is some sort of an hijacking, of a more traditional and open Islam. But of course, the two are based on the essentialization of Islam. So what we have, I think, one of the dominant approach has been, and is still largely, a cultural approach. Culturalist approach. And this culturalist approach has spilled over into the studies of migration. The idea is that if you want to understand what is going on in the Paris suburbs, well, you have to look at Islam. The Salafization of the second generation youth is either an heritage or a quest for identity or what you want, but that the Middle East is still the explanation of what is going on among immigration. And it's clear that the immigration studies are largely influenced by a multiculturalist approach, which is precisely a culturalist approach first. The idea that Islam is still one of the dominant factors to explain, through very complex different processes, but to explain what is going on. And the endeavor by Edward Said to deconstruct essentialism, for me, is a failure. Because for the main reason is that the discourse of the oppressed people is, according to Edward, mainly, using a framework, an intellectual framework, which is the intellectual framework of the colonial power. That the, so in this case, the oppressed, who revolt, have revolt as the only way of expression, but they have to borrow, the categories under which they revolt from precisely the colonial powers. The theory of alienation is going very far, because in a sense, there is no real authenticity in the discourse of the revolt. Take an example, the veil. The veil is analyzed as a protest for identity. Okay. But if you ask the girls who take the veil, not the traditionally veiled people, but the young, educated Muslim girls who take the veil, many of them would not speak about identity, or they would use the term identity because they understand that you understand the term identity. But if they speak about religion, they are not understood. The idea is they don't know what they do. They take something which is a form of submission, the veil, to express themselves, as actors. But the idea that it's not a form of submission, or it's something else, is not really accepted. The idea that, yes, there is a religious dimension, which is not linked with, not necessarily, possibly, but not necessarily linked with culture, or with oppression, or with post-colonialism, or with racism, is not taken seriously. I would say, this trend among many scholars to fight against Islamophobia, to endorse the movement of liberation from the Third World and from Middle East, to explain that Hezbollah and Hamas are in fact legitimate freedom actors, if I can say that, just ignore their own religious dimension, and consider them, these movements as purely political actors. So we have here something which is a real problem to study Middle East, is the secularizing effect of social sciences. Social sciences have a problem to consider religion as religion. And even then the religious people translate the religious feelings into a discourse, a vocabulary, which they see as acceptable by the researcher. And identity is typically one of this kind of register, if I can say that. So another example, is the debate in Europe and the USA on Islamism. What is Islamism? Is Islamism just the contemporary form of Islam into politics? And then we have to go to the starting point, the first society with Muhammad, then going to the different thinkers, Ibn Taymiyyah, Hassan al-Banna, Said Qutb, and at the end, Ben Laden, So some sort of historical and religious genealogy, which will explain present contemporary phenomena like the Muslim Brothers, Nahda, through the lens of Islam as an invariant, Islam as an essence. And it's true that Hanouchi or Hassan al-Banna would use this approach. Hanouchi explains that, yes, his party, in fact, his movement, tries to take the tools, from the time of the Prophet, and he has a lot of pedagogical discourse on using traditional, classical parameters of Islam into politics from the time of the Prophet. But the fact that a religious actor roots his political ideology into a religious genealogy should not, for the political scientist, be the explanation. So now we see where the predicament is. Sometimes we overemphasize, the role of Islam. You cannot understand politics into the Middle East without studying the first society, the first Muslim society under the Prophet. And sometimes, on the contrary, you say, okay, all that, it's a discourse, but we have to deconstruct the discourse and to go to the real things, class struggle, identity, post-colonialism, migration, etc. So the problem is how to get out of this predicament. As I said, the deconstructionist approach is not satisfactory for me because it deconstructs the discourse on Islam, but it doesn't address the real society. A very good book a very good bad book, if I can say that, you know, is the book of Frederick Volpi on Islamism, deconstructing Islamism. It's not the title, but the idea is that. So it takes everything which has been written on Islamism, and it shows that it's always contradictory, it's always ideologically loaded, it's always associated with a political strategy, it's always, in fact, a plot from the Western intellectuals in order to maintain at least the cultural domination of the West. But at the end, what about the Muslims? What about the real people? Because they use the same kind of terms. And here, in this kind of researches, there is a total neglect of what I call, you know, the interactive dimension between social sciences and political actors. It's no more the case that political social scientists do study a society which, in fact, doesn't care about the fact that it is studied, you know. The good old time of the anthropologists studying societies where nobody could read what they write on them is finished. Now they read what we write, as a book, a very good book, by the way, a good book, this one, said, you know. And this kind of interaction, you know, between social sciences and political actors is largely neglected. We should be aware that many of the political actors did go to university. They have a degree. Davutoglu, the Turkish prime minister, is an academic, you know, and he wrote academic books on international relations. Ranucci works with James Piscatori, you know, and wrote articles on the concept of civil society in Islam. You know. He is also an intellectual. An academic is another story, but he is an intellectual. Many of this of the Islamist movement did create think tanks, you know, in order, you know, to adjust their political thinking to the academic market, you know? And they contribute to the collective shaping, you know, of a common knowledge in social sciences on the Middle East. Just personal anecdote. When I wrote The Failure of Political Islam in 1991, there was an uproar among the Islamists, of course, because I was saying that they will fail, you know, not necessarily to become prime minister, but to put in place an Islamic society and explain why they will fail. And at that time, so the only people who were not so bad with me were the Iranians, you know. The mullahs asked me to make a conference in Rome, just to show me that, so the mullah who was heading the conference, he said, Professor Roy, you wrote a book, The Failure of Political Islam, but we won. I said, it depends what we call winning. And then I began to explain, and he stopped me after 15 minutes. He said, oh, you are perfectly right, you know. But there is still a problem with your title. You should have written The Failure of Sunni Political Islam. But 3 years after, the Sunni did invite me. So the municipality of Istanbul, at that time headed by Erdogan, invite me to make a conference, you know, a big conference, you know, 400 people, on the failure of political Islam. So I came, and I had a very bad experience, of course. The audience was polite, but not happy about my title, you know. So they were telling me that I'm totally wrong, and so and so. So at the end, I asked the mayor was not there, but I asked his deputy to explain me. So no, the deputy came to me and said, it was a fantastic conference. It was very good. We are very pleased. Well, I said, maybe you, but these guys were not pleased at all. Why did you invite me? Because in fact, I'm going against your constituency, you know. And he said, yes, it's precisely why we invited you, because we cannot tell them that, you know, not yet, you know, but you can, you know. And they won the election in 2002, you know, not because of me, but because they precisely understand why did political Islam fail, you know. So this interactivity, which for me is very important in social sciences, although it runs against the concept of neutrality, objectivity, scientificity, well, you know, of these kind of things we use when we have a problem with the ethics committee. It doesn't work, of course, concretely. It never works, you know. So it's not a conference on ethics, so... and it explains why all the discourse on deconstructing the discourse on Islam, in fact, is, well, loss of time, I think, now. So the other way to deal with the Middle East is what I can call the Neopositivist approach, you know, to ignore religion and culture, and to use a transversal conceptual framework, comparativism, you know, precisely to ignore the specificity of the Middle East and to try to bring the Middle East back into, you know, the common framework. For instance, state building. So, comparing state building in Europe, Middle East, Southeast Asia, and so on and so on. Transition to democracy. So starting from Latin America, then to Eastern Europe, and then to the Middle East. What are the conditions for democratization, and so on and so on. The theory of the social movement, also trying to bring, you know, the Islamists into a universal framework, which is not, you know, which could avoid the trap, you know, of the exceptionalism, the Islamic exceptionalism. Civil society, also the concept of civil society. Opinion polls, you know, the use of opinion polls, you know, Pew reports, Gallup, and so on. Demography. Okay, so I will not go. I will be back to demography after. International relations, trying to understand geostrategy. Geostrategy is very interesting because it's a discipline which is not very recognized, you know, in social sciences for good reasons. Usually, geostrategy is very close to, very not close, but is very culturalist, you know. And it's a discipline which, until the 80s, I would say, was very associated with the right. But in the 80s, it has been retaken, if I can say that, you know, by a part of the left. But this multidisciplinary approach led to a lot of good works, you know, good field works, you know, good papers and so and so. But with a big problem, you know, a difficulty to precisely have a global picture of what is going on in the Middle East. So that's the story of we have to put bricks, you know, and then we will understand, you know, that working on the Middle East is like the same than working on every other field. Each PhD is a brick, you know, to build the science. You know. Problem is that with bricks you build walls, you know, and not really a conceptual framework. You know. So we are here, you know. There is an inadequation, you know, between social sciences and what is going on in the field. A problem to understand, which explains why we use the use, not we, but the use of imported concepts like terrorism, security, and geostrategy also, to understand what is going on, the importance of the of think tanks, and the importance also the role of journalists. On the Middle East, we have a lot of very good journalists who spent their life studying Middle East, who speak fluently the local languages, and in fact, who are the guys who built the knowledge on Middle East, which is also a challenge for political sciences, because often we disagree with these journalists for many reasons. One of the reasons is that these journalists end as political actors. When you write for the New York Times or for The Independent or for Le Monde for 20 years, you are no more just an observer. You are an actor. You meet the president, you meet the ministers, you meet the ambassadors, everywhere. And people read you. You can be instrumentalized. Of course, everybody can be instrumentalized. But what you say as a journalist is precisely part, not only of the debate, but on what is going on. It's clear that, for instance, the French or the American governments take decisions on the Middle East after reading the newspapers, and not after calling the Middle East Center, the next Middle East Center. So, if we go there, if we look at that, we have some sort of, I would say, little use of the academic knowledge. And if once you go back to the op-ed written by colleagues, what you have, is, well, to put an end to the Islamic State in Iraq and so on. So we should first solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Okay. If we want to put an end to the revolt of the young second-generation Muslims in Paris suburb, we should put an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If we want democracy to take roots in the Middle East, we should put an end to the Israelo-Palestinian conflict. Nobody will put an end to the Israelo-Palestinian conflict, except maybe the Israelis and the Palestinians. And they don't care about our concerns, they don't care about the theory. So we have here the problem that the conclusions of many so-called academic researches are wishful thinking, or militant position. And it's a big problem. So my first intention was to stop there, but because I didn't want to make any policy recommendations, nor any wishful thinking, just to end on a realistic and cynical analysis. But I have 15 minutes more, so I'm obliged to go to the problem is that the multidisciplinary approach, by studying, little boxes, etc., doesn't lead to a global vision of the Middle East. So we have to keep this idea that, yes, we should have a global approach, and not an approach bricks by bricks. Field should be the priority, knowledge of the societies. And it's here that the journalists are good, because they have the field. We have given the fields to the journalists. It's more and more difficult for a lot of reasons for young researchers to make field studies in the Middle East. There are good reasons, security reasons. Regularly, in my former French institution, the CNRS, the guy who is in charge of security, who is always a military officer, ingénieur de l'armement. I never understood why, It's always a guy who is a military engineer coming from the people who make the weapons, And they issue a list of places where we should not go. And of course, all our places are on the list, you know. We should not go to Gaza, sure. We should avoid to go to Kurdistan. Don't go to Syria, don't go to Iraq, don't go to Afghanistan, don't go to Pakistan, don't go to Iran. And they even put Moldavia recently, you know, on the list of dangerous countries. So, the structure now of the research make it more and more difficult for a young student to go to the field. For different reasons. So that's the priority now. The problem now, the other problem is to connecting the different levels. Sociology, demography, and here I would say the only people who in fact did predict the Arab Spring were the demographers. Because and Philippe wrote a book 15 years ago, showing that the societies are changing to a point that, well, and he stopped there, you know, because he's just a demographer. Which is good for people like me, you know, because we can jump, you know, he did the job, and I can jump as a political scientist, saying, well, there is such a change now in society that something will happen. Democratization, you know, I think he never used the word, but it's what we could call a real interdisciplinary approach. You know. We know that the society are changing. What does it mean? What will happen? You know, we can work from that. But the big problem, of course, as usual, is with Islam, is this kind of blind spot in political science about religion. You know, how to understand Islam. And all the theory of democratization, of modernization, all are based on the idea that, well, to have any positive change in the Middle East, there should be some sort of secularization. So as I said, the theory of secularization is at the core, you know, of social sciences. And it's a pity, because it doesn't work like that, you know. And here I think we can use Bourdieu with his theory of the fields, you know. I speak about Bourdieu, not about the Bourdieusians. It's a good thing never to have disciples, because disciples spoil, you know, the heritage. You know. There is an autonomy of the religious field. And not just because the religious field is also a mirror of the relation of the power relations, but also because it has an autonomy, a real autonomy. We have to listen to what religious people say, and not to translate what they say in an acceptable secularized language. You know. They don't care about identity. They care about faith. They care about salvation. You know. Identity is a translation for lazy social scientists, and for journalists, and for the public opinion, and so and so. But there is clearly, in the intuition of Bourdieu, an homothetic relationship, you know, between the religious field and the political field. Two facts, you know, two elements: individualization, diversification. It has been now more than almost 20 years that me and others, like Patrick Henny, for instance, you know, we work on that, you know, the modification of what I call religiosity, you know, the way people behave in relationship with religion. And we found, you know, a lot of changes, but not towards secularization or toward liberal Islam. You know. We are concentrating now, the opinion, public opinion, the decision makers, the journalists, and a huge part of the academy on finding the moderate Muslim, the good, nice, moderate Muslim. You know. The, you know, feminist Muslim, democratic Muslim, gay-friendly Muslim, you know, a secular Muslim. That's all, of course, you know. And of course we don't find him. Or we find him, you know, but the guy has no appeal to anybody, because people go for the real things, you know. And it's very funny, because we are looking for the secular good imam, once we have given up to find a nice secular pope, for instance, or a gay-friendly Lubavitch, you know. Religions are not liberal. That's all, you know, like it or not, you know. So the issue is not about a change in theology. We have here a very distorted reading of Max Weber. You know. The idea that there is a link, for Max Weber it has never been a causal link, between a theological paradigm, predestination in a sense, and a sociological or political paradigm, capitalism, for instance. You know. I just think that it doesn't work, you know. But it's very funny how this reading of Max Weber is popular, because it gives the impression that it explains everything, you know. As long as there is no theological reformation in Islam, there will be no democracy, no secularism, no feminism, and so on and so on. So it simply doesn't work, and it will not work. The idea is, on the contrary, not to focus on theology, but to focus on religiosity, the way people behave towards religion. And this is a trait, you know, which is, for me, one of the key of the understanding of the situation. So now, just to make some sort of global picture, what is going on, you know, in the Middle East in 5 minutes, you know? The big stories, you know, the big narratives are dead. Pan-Arabism, Pan-Islamism, etc. The Israelo-Palestinian conflict is no more at the core of Middle Eastern politics. It's the margins, you know, and nobody cares. You know, the idea that it's the key of what is going on in the Middle East doesn't make sense. You know. Al-Qaeda never really cared about Israel. The Islamic State, the so-called Islamic State, doesn't really care about Israel. You didn't have any big demonstrations in the Middle East after the last Israeli operations against Gaza. You know. The only big demonstration was in London, you know, as usual. In Paris, you had 10,000 people. It's nothing, you know, for France, you know, where the people go to the streets for any good or bad reasons, you know. So, of course, the Israelo-Palestinian conflict has still a huge emotional load. You know. But if you read the op-eds in the New York Times written by scholars on Middle East in the USA, you have the impression that this is the key. It's no more the key. Scholars are still debating about the two-state solution. There will be no two-state solution. It's too late, you know. And on the spot, everybody knows that. You know, Hamas knows that. The Israelis know that. The Palestinians know that. You know. So there is a total discrepancy between what is going on and the narrative on the Middle East. Political Islam is a failure. And now we have the empirical proof, you know. Nahda, the Muslim Brothers, they don't know what to do where they are in charge. You know. They have no specific Islamic way of running a country. And what do they do, like the AKP? What do they do with the religious referential? Because they cannot give up the religious referential. It's their trademark. Well, they go for a Tea Party vision or a Mormon. No Mormon in the room, okay. Or a Mormon conception of what society is. Look at the so-called Islamization of the society made by Erdogan. You know, the secularists say, oh, he's Islamizing the society. And they give a lot of examples, you know. He wants to restrict abortion. Ah, okay. In Iran, nobody cares about abortion, you know. But in Utah, yes, many people care about abortion. He wants to prohibit alcohol from the campus. It's typically American, it's a big debate on the booze on the campuses. He wants to forbid the cafe to sell alcohol on the sidewalks. It's exactly what is going on in Atlanta and many countries like that. He wants to prohibit, to criminalize adultery. You have 10 American states, who have a law against adultery, and 3 others who have a law against sodomy too. Still in charge. She's still applied by used by the courts. So what we have here is not something you have to do with Islam. It has something we have to do with the recomposition of traditional religions in secularized societies. So we have to take a transversal approach in this case. And in this case, comparativism does work, it does work. Radicalization, as I said, I've been saying since 20 years, radicalization, the roots of radicalization are not in the Middle East. They are on the margins of the Middle East, All the crises, the big crises which attracted radicals coming from the West, Chechnya, Bosnia, Afghanistan, are on the margins. And in a sense, what is going on now in Iraq, it's also a matter of the margins, because it's a redefinition of the borders of the Arab world. Towards the Iranian world, the New Kurdistan, and the Turkish world. So it's a matter of boundaries. And all this conflict, Shia-Sunni conflict, has to be explained now in terms of redrawing boundaries, not necessarily state boundaries, that's another story, but redrawing boundaries in the Middle East. And the radicalization is a matter of the margin, geographical margin. The core of the radicalization is the West. I stressed 20 years ago a simple fact that has just been very recently acknowledged: the percentage of converts in radical Islamic organization, 25%. No one Islamic organization everywhere has not only such a percentage of converts, but even a significant percentage of converts. You don't have converts with the Muslim Brothers. You don't have converts with the Iranian Islamic Revolution. You don't have converts with Nahda. You don't have converts with the AKP. And in France, you have few converts with the UEF, few converts, totally marginal. The converts go for radicalization, not because radicalization is a consequence of the religious conversions, but the contrary. They go for a political radicalization. And they convert because the real thing is jihad. Not the Quran, not Sharia. They don't care about Sharia. You know the story, of the 2 last guys who have been arrested in London, coming back from Syria, second generation, not convert, of Pakistani origin. The police find, their last order on Amazon, and the order was Islam for the dummies. That's exactly the guy who joined now Al-Qaeda. And why ISIS? Still, 2 minutes to speak about ISIS. Why ISIS? Because Al-Qaeda is running out of steam. Of course, Al-Qaeda is running out of steam. Al-Qaeda began to run out of steam on September 12, 2001, after the towers. Once you have destroyed the towers, what do you do? So for 10 years, they tried to find something else, So they killed some people, they put some bombs and so on. But it's very difficult to do better, And the people who wanted to join Al-Qaeda, they began to be disappointed, because Al-Qaeda was not able to offer them enough positions, While with ISIS, it's okay. Now you can go, you just take the plane to Istanbul, you take the bus to Gaziantep, and then you have your jihad, You can fight, you can play, you have your video game, It's fun, and you look at the guys. It's fun for them, when we speak in a very good English, I don't know, but very Northern English or suburban English and so on. So it's obvious. So what we have here, Baghdadi, the head of the ISIS, understood why Al-Qaeda is not out of steam, because you cannot just wage a virtual jihad. You have to root, you have to go back to territory. So. And the only territory he found is what is called the Sunni Triangle, because the local population there is upset, and has good reasons to be upset, because they have been marginalized by the two dominant regimes who are Shia or close to the Shias, Syrian regime, Bashar al-Assad, and the Iraqi regime. It's very funny to see that the big change in the Middle East has been initiated by the Americans, who, by destroying the Sunni Iraq of Saddam Hussein, put in charge the Shias, and so opened the doors of the Middle East to the Iranians, who are very happy. They are very happy with the Americans, the Iranians. They are very polite now, it's no more death to America. No, it's long life, stay here, guys, and we have now this incredible coalition against ISIS. And of course, ISIS will be defeated. Of course, for two reasons. They want to kill everybody. And it's not a good strategy. You have to make choices, because if you say to all the other people, we'll kill you, then, the guys, so the weaker leave, the Christians, the Yazidi. But the Kurds, the Shias, the Turks, no, they will not leave, they will fight back, and then the other problem is rooting in the local population. The story of weeding, is very interesting, because the same happened with Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, the same is happening with Boko Haram in Nigeria. The fact that these movements want to marry their fighters, and it's not just because they are sexually what you want, it's a way to territorialize, But a Sunni tribal leader of Fallujah will never give his daughter to a young Franco-Arab from Aubervilliers, So sooner or later, there will be clashes, And so the matrimonial issue is also part of the geostrategic dimension of the Middle East. So in conclusion, we can understand what is going on in the Middle East. We have to put together, very different levels, and we have to take time, and not just be under the pressure of the media, because, as I said at the beginning, it's the logic of the pressure now, which is imposing not the analysis, of course, of the Middle East, but the way we have to, the questions we have to answer, And now we have to take back the questions, which I think is the real duty of an intellectual. Thank you.
Okay, we now open the floor for questions. I think should we try to take them three at a time? 3 questions, and then you answer, and then, okay. So I'll take questions 3 at a time. So raise your hand if you'd like to be recognized and ask a question. I see in the back there. No. In the striped shirt? You're raising your hand? Yeah.
Me, yes. Okay. Hi. Thank you very much for this. And Olivier, I agree with you with many things, but I think you've been a bit too harsh on some people. Like you, I'm also frustrated with political science, and thus now I'm a refugee at the history department. When I started political science as a graduate student, we were taught that, the biggest problem that political science did not see the collapse of the Soviet Union. So they always have a failure to predict, and I think it's a problem of the discipline to try to predict. So, so I'm not sure whether, I'm not sure that, well, in short, and to put it nicely, it's a waste of time to try to save the discipline when it comes to these things. And when you look at the Arab Spring, for example, in addition to demographers, I remember very well Joel Bannon, who's a historian, have been talking about things changing in Egypt, right? And he was, like you said, in the field, and he wasn't talking about Islamists, he was talking about the workers. And that indeed turned out to be the kind of the nucleus of the movement in Egypt, you know, the Mahalla and the workers' movement. And this is also to go back to your point, you know, it's not only Islam that is happening in the region, and, you know, unless you're there, you wouldn't be able to see. The other thing, you know, other disciplines have also you know, took the actors and the history much more seriously than political science. So for instance, I'm thinking about, you know, Islam and secularism. Talal Asad, who's an anthropologist, would agree with many of the things that you say about kind of the relationship, the projection of secularism, secular thought into Islam and Islamic movement and that kind of thing. And Layla Abu Lughad, who's an anthropologist and wrote about, you know, I think there's a book recently, Do Muslim Women Need Saving, right, about the veil, and exactly your point that, you know, what matters for them is not religion, but all of these other issues. So this aside, I think to frame it as deconstruction versus authenticity might be a bit of, you know, throwing the baby with the, what do you call it, bathwater. On the one hand, I think you're right to say that the deconstruction approach and kind of the cultural kind of tendency among Middle Eastern studies people can take us so far, but I think it's still important. So I'm more familiar with sectarianism, for instance, than Islam, right? And then just to reinforce your point that what they've been doing in terms of kind of the rise of sectarianism now is that to say, well, this did not exist in Iraq before, and it's the creation of the Americans because they institutionalized sectarian identities. Well, that's right, but, you know, at the same time, it's wrong because the Americans did not invent these identities. They just gave it a new political form that made it kind of more dangerous than it used to be, and kind of polarized these identities. So I think it's important to deconstruct, but I'm not sure that there is an authentic place that we can revert to and say this is what it is, because once, you know, the deconstruction happens, and also the projection, right? The projection that this region is exceptional and we have to treat it by, you know, politicians and, you know, people from the outside in a special way. You know, these things become part of people's reality. So the woman that you mentioned, that she talks identity because she thinks the person in front of her talks identity. I mean, with time, this becomes part of the reality, you know, kind of the performativity of ideas. So I think it might be more helpful to think about ways where we, take deconstruction seriously, but also see how, you know, things move on the ground without, you know, getting, without stopping being critical of kind of concepts and boxes. And so in that vein, just to, you know, and I'm about to finish this idea, is ignoring exceptionalism, thus would also be an extreme solution. And I think exceptionalism is not just a problem with the Middle East. People who study the US and US politics also suffer from American exceptionalism, right? And especially American history, people talk about that a lot. But it might, you know, what one, you know, perhaps can do is to start with deconstructing the exceptionalism and moving forward to show how it's connected to the world.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I think we should probably give some other people an opportunity to ask questions as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Olivier. I agree with your major point, but I wanted to try to make a defense of the third scene, comparativism, because I think it addresses also your very skeptical views of literature in this area, which I don't share 100%, let's say. So first of all, I think I'm guilty of this sin, but what pushed me towards comparativism, even with an area which I don't know very much, like the Middle East, is the fact that my impression was that area studies in general were jeopardized by the tendency to focus too much just on specific type of explanations, and that you need some comparatists who maybe doesn't speak the language, but could try to provide a partial view, a partial interpretations. And related with this, when I started to do this, so to try to compare, I've read a lot of the literature which you criticized. I think your critiques are fine, but I wonder if we don't need also this type of literature. For instance, it is religion, but also something else. It is religion, but also identity. So I wonder if the richness doesn't come exactly, like in other areas, from the fact that there are many partial views that you can criticize as partial, but help understanding the whole. And the final point related with this, in Bourdieu's approach, fields are endowed with their own habits and so on, but they are related to each other. So I think that this is also something which could be useful to link the different literature. Thank you.
Okay, we can take one more question if there's another question before Philip.
Big button, okay. Thank you for a fascinating talk on a topic I know next to nothing about. The question I have is simple. Why are some people religious and others not? And why are some world regions more religious than others?
Okay, well now, hear from the speaker before we take any more questions.
I agree with both of the first questions, critics. Let's take it as a prediction. The issue is not to predict the time, when something will happen. That's something which is, I think, not our concern. The issue is to predict what will not happen. The possibility of change. And I think on that there was some sort of a weakness. Predicting an event doesn't mean that you know. For instance, the Islamic Revolution of Iran, was a surprise for all the scholars. I think of my colleague Nikki Keddie, who was the expert on the Iranian Shiism and clergy. And 1 year before, and Fred Halliday also, they published a book 1 year before the Islamic Revolution, and they both said, oh, the clergy is finished, the society is modernizing, secularizing, and so, and boom. But there was a guy who predicted quite accurately the revolution. It was the head of the French intelligence agency at the embassy in Tehran. So I asked to meet him, some years after. And I asked him, how did you, predict? Oh, he said, the guy didn't speak Persian, came just 6 months before the event, and so I said, how did you predict? He said, it's easy. So I didn't know anything about Islam, so when I came to Tehran, I read the Quran, and by reading the Quran, I said, but it's a revolutionary book, something will happen, Okay, so he was right, but for quite wrong reasons, So let's forget about prediction now. About the other disciplines, I fully agree. We need. And the anthropologists did very, very good work on Middle East. The problem is to go from one field to a whole society. That's the problem of the anthropology. Is there an anthropology of the Middle East? My good friend Dale Eichelman wrote a book, The Anthropology of Middle East, and he's a very ambitious guy because the next edition he added Anthropology of the Middle East and Central Asia. You know, so, of course, you can say that something called tribalism is to be found in Morocco, Yemen, Afghanistan, and so on. So, but the idea that there is something in anthropology which is typical of the Middle East is also a bit of a problem, you know. Deconstruction and as well, and for Donatella, comparativism. I have a critical approach, but I never said that it's not useful. I think we should begin with deconstruction, you know, and we should use comparativism. A problem I have are the limits, you know. The deconstructionists at the time, they cannot stop to deconstruct. You know, so it's a deconstruction of the deconstruction, you know, because there is always a guy who deconstruction better than you, you know? And at the end, okay, so what we do? So the problem is then what does the subaltern say, you know, because he or she says something, you know. They do something, you know, the new terms that are very now fashionable, agency, empowerment, you know. Okay, it's a fashion, but it makes sense also, you know. And here the problem is still, I'm not saying, you know, that religion is just religion. Religion is also identity. Religion is also culture. But what doesn't, what is impossible to reduce, you know? What is the thing that you will not bring in your box? And precisely the thing which will make the problem. It's that which is interesting me. But you are absolutely right, you know. We cannot say our religion is something that the social sciences cannot understand, and so we have to acknowledge this irruption of the sacred. No, I'm not saying that. The only guy who defined religion like that, contrary to what many people think, was Foucault. You know? When Foucault wrote about the Islamic revolution of Iran, he said religion is precisely the absolute negation of politics. And so it's a miracle, but it cannot last. Because, of course, there will be next morning, and of course, politics will be back. So he defined the religious revolution as a strike of politics, you know. But he said very explicitly that it's not sustainable. So, and of course, there could be a sociology of religion, sociology of religious practices, of course. But the moment, you know, when religion is precisely not translatable, is precisely when it becomes a problem, you know, and it might take the form of violence. So what to do with this kind of violence, you know, and with violence in general, by the way. And last question: why are some people religious? I don't know. It precisely, if I could answer your question, would precisely mean that religion is something that you can put in a box, you know, and define, you know, in a. But my guess is that when religion appears to be just religion, it's because it's on the verge of secularization, which might be good news or bad news, depends which side of God you are.
Rainer.
Well, like Philippe, I know very little about the Middle East and a little bit more, but also very little about Islam. So I'm just trying to understand the nature of the argument that you proposed to us in a very refreshing talk. The first part I understood as making really extremely opposite kinds of critiques. You criticized those who take Islam as the explanans, the cause of phenomenon that we then can explain, but you equally criticized those who take the Islam as the explanandum, you know, something that needs to be explained by other kinds of social, structural, economic, whatever causes. So, you know, what's the perspective from which you can state both kinds of critiques simultaneously? Similarly, you criticized you started actually by saying the whole field is too politicized. You know, which means there is not enough distance that we take from politics, but you also criticized the neopositivistic attempt to create some distance between the researcher and the object, you know, and look at it from a non-politicized perspective. So again, the question is, how can you have both kinds of critiques at the same time? Now, I was hoping for more towards the end, and there was something more towards the end that I find very promising. There were certain positive recommendations how to do proper social science, if you wish, on these phenomena. A global approach to the region, to understand it comprehensively, taking religion seriously. I think this is all very valid. And then two specific comments that left me, you know, wanting to hear more. One was that the source of radicalization in the region comes from contested boundaries, not just politically, probably also religious ones between Shia and Sunni, etc. And secondly, that the radicalization starts from the West and is in a way imported into that region. That seems very interesting, but can you give us, please, more that would allow us to understand why now and why there?
We have another question over here.
Yes, Olivier, thanks very much for your fascinating presentation. Actually, I would have two comments. The first one is purely academic, but it has to do with your own background. I was questioning about when you were, you know, at the beginning when you were mentioning the fact that, you know, after the study of the communism, you know, the West today is facing a kind of, let's say, I don't know, quite irrational approach of the Middle East, or more generally speaking, the Islamic world, because it is a highly politicized field. But in terms of reflexivity, you know, you have mentioned Bourdieu, so let's go back, please, to reflexivity. So this notion of exceptionalism, according to your own background, because you have studied Central Asia, and so you have wondered about the emergence of, or the communism, you know, as an ideology. Has it been useful to you to understand the Muslim world and countries like Afghanistan and so on? And because when you were mentioning Campus Watch and some, you know, some US scholars today, they are constructing the Islamic reference as the new enemy or the new adversary of the West, you know, in the wake of the communist threat. You know, after decades of communist threat, we are supposed to face today an Islamist or Islamic threat, you know. Has it been useful for you to study, first of all, you know, communism in terms of flexibility? This notion of exceptionalism, has it been useful, you know, to understand? Because you were saying, for example, that Campus Watch is very illustrative of this, you know, of this continuous continuity. But I have the ideas. I was wondering about the fact that this man, Daniel Pipes, for instance, is the son of Richard Pipes, who was a scholar specialized in communism. And you, as a former, you know, person interested in communism and today in Islamic studies, do you feel it's kind of, is it some usefulness in the study of your topic today? And the second point is more personal, so I would like to make a kind of tribute, because you gave us the desire to learn about Islamic societies, and your experience has been, you know, tremendous in our desire today to continue and to join the new generations of scholars, you know, dealing with Middle East studies. So thank you very much.
This will be the last question, and we'll hear the speakers reply, and then we will adjourn for drinks after that. So,
following up on Rainer's question, in the very end, you made a strong prediction about the Islamic State. You said for two reasons they will not go anywhere. The one is they make too many enemies, killing everybody, and the other one is they are not rooted in society. The Fallujah guy would never give a daughter to these mercenaries. Now, the time perspective of this prediction would be very interesting. And And there might also be a third reason why they don't go anywhere, because of an international coalition putting them down with military means. What do you say?
Olivier, you have the last word. Go.
Okay, so for the Reiner's question, I used a very old trick, which had been invented by the church councils. When you want to define an orthodoxy, you define two heresies, one on the left, one on the right. And the Communist Party congresses also used to do that. So, and once you have defined two enemies on every side, you are the right guy, So, in fact, Islam as an essence is a self-fulfilling explanation. Everything is because of Islam, so it's a cycle, and there is nothing else. Deconstruction, as I said, the problem is if you deconstruct too much, then what is left? So the issue is how to take into consideration religion, without essentializing religion. And it's very volatile because, as Donatella said also, a religious people is not just a religious people. Of course, a faithful believer doesn't think about God all the day. So there is also the rent to pay, elections, and what you want, and hence the tricky thing, on spotting the mutations of the what is specifically religious. But it's never, you cannot isolate it. And of course, it's regularly recast by the believer himself or herself into something which is negotiable. And acceptable or not, because you could have also the total refusal of the believer to negotiate. An ermite, some sort of monk, for instance, a radical, a fanatic, what you call, they say, I will not negotiate. But usually, yes, it's a permanent negotiation, And what we're studying, for instance, in our project Religion West, is this kind of negotiation. It's why we're working on the courts, for instance. In the West, because the state has no right to define what the religion is, who is dealing with what do you do with the religious claim? The courts. But the courts have no definition of the religious, of course. And they have no right to define a good religion. What is a good religion? Although they try, So we work on that, this permanent formatting, negotiations, ruptures, of religion. And same with Neo-Positivism. Of course, we need, as I said to Donatella, we need disciplines. We need studies, different approaches, and so on. So, and of course, politicization is unavoidable. But there are different. The problem is not to avoid politicization. The problem is to master politicization. And here I think, yes, we should try to go beyond emotions. There is an emotional dimension. It's very interesting to see how the academic community has created some sort of, not protocol, but the etiquette, of debates, to avoid precisely to fight, during a conference on the Middle East. And one of the etiquette is to begin your speech by saying, I am in favor of a two-state solution. Okay, so incidentally enough, our beloved president, when we interviewed him, by Skype, and nobody was asking him anything about the Israelo-Palestinian conflict, said, without any question, I am for a two-state solution. And then all he said, it's the etiquette of the academy. We can now discuss, between scholars. And we need etiquette. I am not criticizing that. We need this kind of etiquette. But maybe we could also go a bit further, and discuss on the real thing. Also, we have to say something to the government, but what? And what use they will do. My experience, as a consultant, is that in fact you never influence the decision, but the argumentation you write might be used, after to legitimize a decision, a political decision, which has been taken for other reasons. But the rephrasing of a political decision through other reasons has also an impact. So the decision to invade Iraq was not based on a rational analysis of the Middle East. Not at all, so totally rational. But the way the Americans tried to rationalize aftermath, their invasion, had a structuring or destructuring, that's another story, impact on the Middle East. A lesson from communism, yes, studying communism first is a good introduction to understand the role of ideology, the way one constructs an enemy, the weakness precisely of this enemy, the fact that the Soviet Union was a system close to the collapse, precisely at the time where everybody thought that it was the worst, the best, dictatorship, if I can say that, in the world. So, yes, and radicalization of young radicals also was a good teaching for me. And the easiest question for ISIS, when? I have strictly no idea, but not 20 years. No, I think, and so the mic is open, and it's recorded that in 1 year it will be finished, in less than 1 year. I think it's a very fragile situation. But what will happen after? Where the people who go to join ISIS will go after? I don't know. But I think that there is something which we are underestimating, is the disillusion of many young militants who go there. A good example is what happened today in France. 4 people, the family of Mera, came back from Syria. 4, one was a convert, so we have my statistic, 25% of converts. Very good sample. And they came back, and the police was supposed to arrest them, but the police missed the plane. And when they arrived, they went to the gendarmerie saying, but we want to be arrested, So, and they went to the gendarmerie and they say, it was a bad trip,
So somewhere in one of the adjoining rooms, there's supposed to be drinks.
Could you show the book?
Ah.
Yeah, if you want to know more, there is a book in French.